All right, so here we are again. So let's get back to where we were. That was chapter 8. First, let me get it open here. So we've already done some of this. I think, oh, wait a minute.
Law of diminishing returns.
Oh, the demand for labor. I'm pretty sure that's where we left off. The demand for labor. That looks right. All right, hold on one second. Yeah, we pretty much covered everything about the law of diminishing returns. And so now we're ready for the labor market. All right, let's do this. All right, first let me save this for a second. Today's the 25th. All right, the labor market. Now, the labor market is like any other market where there's a supply and there's a demand. But what's different now is that in equilibrium, we're determining not the price as such. We're going to think of the wages or the wage rate as the price of labor. Okay, in other words, the supply and demand interacts to determine how much labor is hired, but it also determines how much people are getting paid. So in a way, you can think, if you think of the wage as a price, then this is no different than any other supply and demand curves that we've done before. So we're going to see how and why, where these come from. So we're going to start out by looking at the demand for labor. And so, of course, the demand for labor obviously comes from employers. What exactly do employers hope to do when they hire labor? What is the point of hiring labor? What is their goal? Well, if this is a profit-making organization like a corporation, the whole idea here is that they want to hire labor that can produce something useful to them that enables them to sell goods and services in the marketplace. So clearly, they will want to hire labor as long as the wages that they pay are no more than the value of what the workers produce. Ideally, the value of what the workers produce should even be more than the wages, but certainly they will not hire labor if the value of what they produce is less than their wages. Now, labor, of course, is necessary to produce products, but obviously there's different kinds of labor. We're going to make a very simplifying assumption here that there's just one type of labor and there's one wage for all labor. Obviously, this is not true, but if we want to make distinctions between different types of labor, we can certainly create demand curves and supply curves for different types of labor as well. So here, let's just assume there's one type of labor and that's it. So it stands to reason then that the higher the wages are in the marketplace, the less labor will be hired by employers, because that obviously reduces profits. So this is the same as the demand for any other product in the market.
You know what I do now?
At a high, you're going to have a low quantity demanded and vice versa. So there's a negative or inverse relationship between quantity demanded. Oh, one more thing. I just want to mention here, we're thinking in terms not of nominal wages, but real wages. So let me just quickly remind everyone what that's all about. Any nominal variable, or let's just put it this way, a real variable is one that has been adjusted for inflation. Okay, nominal variable is one that has not been adjusted for inflation. Nominal variables are measured in what we call current dollars, and real wages are measured in constant dollars, they're called. And you might recall that this means that the real wages, in this case, this is supposed to say variables. Real variables are measured in constant dollars. So in a case like this, nominal wages are the actual wages seen in the market. Okay, so in other words, if you're being paid $20 an hour, that's a nominal wage. So how do you convert that into a real wage, well, we have to define what we what would be, let's say, a base year. So the real wage is measured in terms of prices that existed during the base year. All right. So in other words, the idea here is that a real wage is meant to indicate how much indicates how much purchasing power we have, or our wages give us. Well, the nominal wage only shows us how many dollars we have or dollars we earn. So it's an important distinction. The nominal wage says we earn, let's say, $20 an hour. The real wage tells us how much we can actually buy with our wages. Okay, so in most applications, the real wages are the ones that we're really focused on, because again, the nominal wages can include both an inflation component and any changes in the real wage. So it's understood that the growth of real wages indicates how quickly standards of living are rising. Okay, in other words, if your salary is only going up as fast as the rate of inflation, your salary is going up, but in real terms, you're not any better off than you were in the past. So you're basically, your standard of living is stagnating. What we hope to see is that real wages go up over time, meaning that we can acquire more and more goods and services with our wages. And that's, of course, the whole purpose of measuring standards of living. What can you do with your incomes? That's what we want to know. So in this chapter, we're going to assume that we are looking at real wages rather than nominal wages. All right, so I just want to remind everyone how that works. So here's the labor demand schedule for a small country. So the real wage ranges anywhere from $0 to $30 an hour. And the corresponding quantity demanded is in the middle column. And then the points on the chart we'll see in a second. And clearly, as you can see, as the real wage goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. So in this country, for example, if people are willing to work for free, well, that would be wonderful for the employers. Then they'd be happy to hire 12 million workers at such a low wage. But if the wage jumps up to $5 an hour, then the quantity demanded drops to 10, and then so on, all the way down to 30. If the real wage reaches $30 an hour, then nobody will be hired. Okay, now presumably this means that whatever they're doing, whatever they're making, is not worth $30 an hour to the employer. In other words, they can't sell it in the marketplace and recover the cost of those wages, so they don't bother to hire anyone. All right, so in other words, at the very least, the wages that you pay have to cover or be recovered by the value of the product that you're selling. Okay, so we use this to create a labor demand curve, and it looks just like any other demand curve you've ever seen, except that we have wages on the vertical axis, real wages, and the quantity demanded is in millions of hours per year. Now, how about the supply of labor? Who is it that's responsible? Where does it come from? In other words, who provides labor to the marketplace? All right, well, there's no mystery there. Unlike the cases we've seen before where supply comes from corporations or businesses or whatever the case may be, here supply comes from individuals. Okay, you and I work and we provide our labor to the marketplace. Now here, of course, as you can probably imagine, that as the real wage rate rises, the quantity of work that we're willing to do will go up as well. All right, it's like, imagine yourself working in a job where you have the opportunity to work overtime and earn more money. How will you decide how much free time you're willing to give up in order to have more wages? Well, imagine two different scenarios. In the first scenario, the overtime is worth, let's say, $10 an hour. Well, you might be willing to give up some of your free time to work for $10 an hour. But what if the wage that they're offering you is $50 an hour? At such a high wage, you might be willing to give up 100% of your free time because they're paying you so well. So the idea here is that when wages go up, people are willing to work more hours because it's more beneficial to them. And because the more you work, the less free time you have. Every time you work more hours, you're incurring an opportunity cost. And so that means that in order to offset or compensate for that, you need to be offered a progressively higher wage rate. All right. So therefore, as you would imagine, the supply of labor is positively sloped, meaning that it's upward sloping, because as wages go up, so will the quantity of labor that is made available in the marketplace. All right, so let's say this is the same little small country, and we have a supply schedule with a real wage of 0. Nobody works. Why would they? Okay. Does anyone work for free? I don't think so. So, but as the wage rises, more and more people step forward and say, yes, I'm willing to work at that wage rate. So we have a supply curve corresponding to our demand curve that looks just like any other supply curve you've ever seen. And it's upward sloping. And the vertical axis, we have the real wage in terms of dollars per hour. On the horizontal axis, we have the quantity supplied in millions of hours per year. So you can probably guess what's coming next. What would you do if you had a supply curve and a demand curve for labor? What do you suppose is the next logical step? Well, how about bringing them together and identifying the equilibrium wage rate and the equilibrium quantity of labor? Of course, so let's do that. So I put these together on another chart, and you can clearly see that at a real wage of $15 an hour, we are in equilibrium because the quantity demanded exactly matches the quantity supplied. All right, and we can see that on the graph right here, and you can see where they cross. We've got a wage of $15 an hour. 6 million hours will be available per year. All right, so far so good? Yes. Now, what if we have a different type of situation? Suppose, for example, let's say for whatever reason, the wage rate rises to 20. Benefits. Oh, let's say that that's all lumped together in the wages. In other words, we'll use the word wage as a generic term that means both wages and benefits. Okay, we're just keeping things simple. So if the price drifts up for some reason, let's say to $20 an hour, what's happening in this market? What do you think? What's going to happen if the real wage rate, for some reason, instead of being $15 an hour, it creeps up to $20 an hour? What do you think will be the result? Well, why don't we read across?
There would be a surplus.
Exactly. There's a surplus. You can see if you look down here, the quantity, this is supply. I forgot to label these, I guess. The quantity supplied, which means the number of people who are willing to work, is 8 million. But employers only want to hire 4 million workers. So there will be a surplus of workers. Now, in another type of market, the price or the wage would just drop down to the equilibrium level. But economists have noticed something very interesting about wages in the real world. So let me add that in here. In the real world, wages are a very different matter than other market prices. Wages are said to be sticky. Now, what do you suppose that means? Does it mean they're covered with honey? No, it means that wages typically do not fall when market conditions would normally lead to a reduction in wages. For example, when there's a surplus of labor, wages tend not to fall. Instead, people simply remain unemployed until market conditions change. So this is one of the ways in which the labor market is very different from other markets. The convention is that employers do not lower wages. Instead, people lose their jobs. Okay, so if you've ever been out there in the real world, suppose the economy is going into a recession and your company is running into trouble. You might think that they would say, listen, everyone, in order to survive, we need to offer you a 10% pay cut. It doesn't usually work that way. Usually what they do instead is they get rid of 10% of their labor force. Everyone who stays keeps the higher wages. So what you end up with is a situation where the surplus is likely to persist a lot longer than it would with a regular market for some other product. So here, the market tends not to adjust very quickly because of this, whatever reason. Employers tend not to lower wages. Instead, they tend to lay off people when times are tough. And so because of that, the adjustment process is very slow in the labor market, and you can have extended periods of time with unusually high levels of unemployment. Okay, and that's partially because of these sticky wages. And in fact, when we were talking about Keynes way back in the beginning, and this is actually one of the big differences between Keynes' outlook and the classicals. The classicals would have said, listen, so what if wages are above their equilibrium level? Fairly quickly, they should fall back to their equilibrium level, and then everybody will be happy again. Unemployment will disappear without any intervention by the government. But Keynes said, no, the way it works here is that wages tend to be sticky. So that means that when wages reach excessively high levels, there's no real strong tendency for them to fall back to their equilibrium levels. And as a result, we can have extended periods of unemployment. And for that reason, he said, the government has to step in and intervene to help do something about the unemployment rate here. So one of the differences in the outlooks of the classicals and the Keynesians is how quickly markets adjust. And in this case in particular, the labor market, we see that in reality, they tend to adjust very slowly compared to other types of markets. Now, on the other hand, though, what's interesting is that if we have the opposite situation, let's say that the real wage is actually too low. Too low, right. Okay, so let's say that for some reason the real wage drops down to 10. Okay, so at 10, you can see the quantity demanded and remember here, quantity demanded means what employers are willing to hire. Employers would like to hire 8 million workers, but only 4 million people are willing to work at such a low wage. Now, in a case like this, you might say, well, is there stickiness on the upside? The answer is not really. If wages are too low and employers can't hire enough workers, in that case, wages will rise, just like they would for any other market. So in other words, in a case like this, employers say, listen, where are all the people that we want to hire? What's their problem? Why can't we attract them to come work for us? Oh, here's the problem. Let's raise their wages. And soon enough, we'll be back in equilibrium. So the stickiness really only applies in one direction. They tend to be sticky only in the downward direction. If wages are too low and that leads to a shortage, employers need to get their products produced, they will turn around and start offering higher wages until the situation resolves itself. All right. Now, you can also imagine that different conditions can cause these curves to shift around, just like in any other market. There are factors that can cause the supply and demand for labor to go up or down. For example, what do you suppose could cause people to want to work more? Well, it could very well be that simply the number of people in the market is increasing. Suppose that the more babies are born than ever before, and 20 years down the road, the supply of labor increases. What is the tendency to happen to wages? Ah, look at that. Then they might start to drift down. So an increase in the supply of labor would have an impact, a very negative impact on wages. And in fact, if you read the news a lot, right now there's a lot of controversy about immigration. This is one of the arguments that people use to keep immigration as low as possible. Their argument being that if we have more immigrants coming in and working, look what happens to the wages of Americans. This is what they're saying. Listen, there's more people coming in to compete with for these jobs, and look what happens to the equilibrium wage level. It can fall as a result of allowing more people into the country. On the other hand, you get countries like Western Europe where the population is actually shrinking because there were generations of Europeans where the birth rate was very, very low, not enough to keep the population growing. So in countries like that, the supply of labor is actually shrinking. And if that happens, well, you can see wages would start to go back up again. So in other words, imagine that you're in Greece and the population is actually falling and there aren't enough people to do all the jobs that they have available. What has to happen? Wages have to go up, okay? Because there simply aren't enough people to do all these jobs. Or else they emigrated to other countries. That's a possibility too. In fact, you get certain areas of the world where hanging on to people is a big challenge. I know that in Alaska, for example, one of the biggest issues they have there is that young people, as soon as they're old enough, they graduate from college, first shot, they move down to the continental United States. And before you know it, there's not enough people there to work in whatever industries they have. It happens a lot. So that means that wages are probably going to be very high if you're willing to work in Alaska because it's so hard to attract workers. Now, for some people, that might be worthwhile to do that, even though, I mean, let's face it, when you're in Alaska, you're not exactly surrounded by a major metropolitan area. It takes a little getting used to live in an area like that. I'm sure you've seen all those TV shows about people who live in Alaska. It's not the height of civilization there. Let's just say that there's may not be a whole lot of museums hanging around or any other places to do something interesting, but they have a lot of natural beauty and that might be attractive to people, but the wages definitely are higher because it's so hard to get people to live there. Okay,
I'm sorry. Is there an issue here because we're not differentiating between any kind of labor? I mean, different kinds of labors, like we're talking about immigrants. Immigrants aren't coming in and taking away jobs from doctors.
That's right, they're not. Right, so you're absolutely right. In a case like that, we have to be more specific. Let's say that they're competing for unskilled jobs, like people who work in stores and that kind of thing. You're absolutely right. So here maybe we're painting this with too broad of a brush. We would have to then, to analyze this properly, take a look at only that specific labor market. In other words, probably the market for unskilled labor where this is happening. You're right. This would not have any influence on the supply of doctors or lawyers for the most part. In fact, some people would argue the opposite in those cases, that maybe we should have more doctors and lawyers immigrating to the United States. But what they're also suggesting is that they should probably try to avoid having too many unskilled workers come in because they're pushing down the wages of the people who are the least competitive in the marketplace. So that's absolutely correct. This really only applies, this discussion about immigration mainly applies to the lower end of the wage market. But you could also analyze separately each of these different sectors of the labor market and see what impact immigration has on each one of them individually. This is more like a big generic all-purpose labor market that we're looking at here. But anyway you look at it, a larger supply of workers will lower the wages in that market, and a reduction in workers will always increase it. Now, on the other hand, here's an interesting case. What could cause the demand for labor to go up? Why would employers suddenly say, you know, we want to hire more workers at every wage? Here's a classic example of that. What if productivity rises? What does that have to do with anything? Why would employers suddenly be so eager to hire workers if their productivity goes up? Suppose, for example, the population in general is becoming more and more well-educated. Their skill sets are rising. What does that tend to do to productivity?
Increase
It
productivity.
increases it. Now, remember what productivity means. It means the ability to convert resources into goods and services. So if you've got employees working for you who are extremely talented and skilled, well, you're going to want to hire more people like that because they can produce more output for you and therefore higher profits. So when productivity in the economy rises, the demand for labor tends to rise as well. In fact, before the COVID came along, we saw evidence of this because the unemployment rate got as low as 3.5%, which it had never been at before. And a lot of people think that that's because productivity is rising so quickly, largely due to technology. Okay, technology absolutely raises productivity. And so the more rapidly our technology advances, the higher productivity goes, and the more demand there should be for labor. But then, of course, the good old virus came along, and possibly lower income taxes, because if more people are working and paying taxes, the rate can fall. Although it doesn't usually work that way. The government will just spend whatever it gets its hands on. But so the demand for labor could go up due to an increase in productivity. But if now sometimes we go through periods in history where productivity can actually shrink or at least grow more slowly. And when that happens, the demand curve would tend to shift to the left. Okay, so productivity increases represent this increase. If I shift the demand curve to the left, that could very well be to lower productivity. Or other disasters like higher cost of resources. Suppose, for example, oil prices suddenly tripled overnight. That's going to have a very depressing effect on the demand for labor. So in other words, anything that makes it more difficult to produce goods and services from the employers will make them less likely to hire workers. The demand drops, and then wages will have downward pressure put on them. Okay, so anyway, so this is a very brief introduction to labor markets. This is a very deep area of study. You can actually take at a school that offers a full economics major. Well, actually, we do, don't we? But it's a very small department. Having said that, many economics departments actually offer a full course in just labor economics. In fact, now that I think about it, maybe they do have that here as well. I'd have to look in their catalog because I usually just end up doing micro and macro for them, but I also do international trade. But it's not unthinkable that Purchase offers a full semester labor economics, and they do have an economics major. It's just that it's a relatively small department compared to some of the other ones. So if you suddenly decide one day, you know what, I kind of like this economics stuff, maybe I should be an economics major. They do have it. I don't know if they specifically have this course, but they have a lot of interesting courses. And you never know what you might decide to do. In fact, why don't we check this out for a second? Let's see what they have on their schedule. They do have it. Oh my God. Let's see, labor economics. There you, oh my God, what do you know? Man, they have a lot more courses than I even realized. The thing about the economics department is that 10 years ago, it was really tiny. And then all of a sudden, somehow they managed to start attracting a lot more economics majors. And suddenly the department got a lot bigger than it had ever been before. So now they can afford to have a lot more of these specialized courses. And so you could actually spend the whole semester talking about labor markets. It would be very heavily micro based, but it could be very interesting. Wow, look at all the stuff they have. Man, there's all kinds of goodies here. Something for everyone, depending on what you're interested in. But yeah, wow, look at that. So if anybody ever had any thoughts about doing this, there you go. There's something here for everyone. And if you don't want to go that far, you can always do a minor. I don't know the details, but most schools you can have a minor by taking like something like 4 or 5 courses in that discipline. And then before you know it, you've got that minor on your diploma along with your regular major. Interesting. Wow. How could you look at this list and not start saying, look at all these goodies I could be taking? Oh, here's a hint though. Econometrics is advanced statistics. Save that for when you really have the right background. So once you don't take that class without having a stats course. But the rest of these, basically you could take any time, as long as you've had basic micro or macro, or maybe both. Okay. Other than that, man, what a great selection they have. I didn't even realize they had half this stuff. That's because I tend to do the same classes over and over again. But yeah, well, there's everything there. All right, anyway, enough of that. I don't get any commissions, by the way, if anybody switches their major. It may seem like it, but no, I think that would be great. If people find this interesting enough, you might want to at least think about, at the very least, taking more electives in the economics department. All right. Now this is done. So we're ready for the next chapter, which is a little bit different. What are we doing in 9? 9 is an introduction to growth. Oh, speak of the devil, economic growth. Now, economic growth is really what's ultimately responsible for our standards of living. The faster the economy grows, the more rapidly our standards of living can grow. Okay, it's just that simple. So the economy can grow fairly quickly for a lot of different reasons, although we have to be a little careful. If it grows too quickly, we can experience an increase in the inflation rate. If it grows too slowly, then we can experience rising unemployment. So basically what we're concerned with here is how quickly is real GDP changing over time. The magic word here being real, not nominal, because we know that when nominal GDP goes up, that could be due to an increase in output, but it could also be simply due to an increase in inflation. So we'd like to focus our attention on real GDP growth. Now, let's see if we can go and look at the recent history of real GDP growth in the United States. We're going to rely on our friend Fred here, the Federal Reserve Economic Database. And this is, this is really, oh man, I thought this was going to be the growth rate. This is just the absolute level of real GDP. And you can see that in general, it tends to rise. Occasionally you have these downward dips during a financial crisis, for example, or during the COVID crisis. But even here, you can see it's making a nice little rebound. Nice, that's good to see. That's very heartening to see. But usually when the economy slows down, it doesn't slow down that sharply. And when it does fall off sharply, it tends to come back quickly. And that's what we're seeing right here. But if you were to sit down and look at this, if you could draw a line through all these points, you would see that it has a positive slope. And the slope of that line would tell us how quickly real GDP has grown during this period. Now, I actually have some videos that we could watch that will talk about the growth in real GDP. And in fact, if I remember correctly, there was one where they explained how standards of living have actually quadrupled since the 1950s because, well, largely part due to productivity growth, but also because of other factors as well. But you can see, if you look at these numbers, between 1950, 2120, you know what, I'm going to sit down, see if I can figure this out. We went in 1950 from 2,120 to right now. The last number they have here for 2020 is 18,794.426. So what I'm going to do is figure out what the annual growth rate has been over that period. Hold on one second. All right, hold on. Okay, so that represents an annual growth rate of almost exactly 3% per year. Well, 3% doesn't sound like a lot of rapid growth, does it? No, but the reality is that's actually a fairly good, solid record, because at a rate of 3% per year, our standards of living should be doubling roughly every 25 years or so. In other words, once every generation, the size of the economy should roughly double in real terms, which means our standards of living are also doubling. So that's a very impressive performance. And what has been driving this, of course, a lot of it has to do with productivity. In other words, we've been finding more efficient ways to use our resources. The labor force is better trained, has more experience. The equipment they have to work with is better than ever. Technology keeps advancing. So there's a lot of reasons why this is happening. So 3% is roughly what we're aiming for. And that's pretty much what we've achieved. Anything faster than that has the risk of triggering inflation, and anything less than that has the potential to increase unemployment. So this is what we're hoping to see, roughly 3% per year, and that's what we've seen going back to the 50s. Now, another area that people like to study, economists, I should say, is real GDP per capita, which means per person, because that means that how much is each individual benefiting from growth. So here again, you can see, according to this, in 1950, per capita real GDP was 14,101, and up here, it's now up around 56,812. So I'm going to quickly figure out what that growth rate is. Now, if this number is less than 3%, it would indicate that the population has actually grown faster than the economy. So let's find out. Hold on one second. Yeah, so the per capita, it's only about 1.6%. So that tells me that the population has been growing more quickly than the economy. So that on a per person basis, it's still fairly good, 1.6%, but not nearly as impressive as the grand total. Okay, but still, that's a lot of growth. And this number, 56,812, that's per person. So that means in a household of 4 people, you're looking at, Wow. $227,248. Not bad, huh? Wow. So where do we stand compared to the rest of the world while we're thinking about this? I think if I remember correctly, if I've seen these numbers, we'll start by looking at real GDP by country. Okay, there it is. This is as of the end of 2018. So you can see the US is way, way, way in the top. 20.4, China, well, China's getting up there. 14, that's about 2/3 of what we are. Japan is about a quarter of where we are, 5.1 trillion. Then we see a little more further down the list. We have Germany and the UK and France and Italy and India. What if we do this though by GDP per capita? Okay, let's see if we can find that. Here we go. Now look at this. The United States is only number 7. Look who's ahead of us. Luxembourg. How is Luxembourg so far ahead of us? What's going on in Luxembourg? What do you think is the reason for that?
Banking.
There's a lot of banking, and also the population is really, really small. So you have a small number of people who are making lots and lots of money. And so that's why it turns out to be so high. All right, Luxembourg is a tiny little country. And so we could do some more research about that if you want to, but it's tiny. Now, Singapore, tiny, tiny little country, no natural resources. How did they get to this point? What are they doing down there that makes them so affluent? A lot of it is electronics, manufacturing, that type of thing. And it also has a relatively small population. Qatar, what is so great about Qatar? What is the one thing they have that makes them so wealthy?
Oil.
Oil, that's right. It's a tiny little country. Well, or I should say it's very sparsely populated and they have a lot of oil. Ireland, now I'm not sure what's going on in Ireland. It must be the size of their economy isn't really that large. I think what must be happening here is that it must have a very small population. Switzerland is a very successful country. Norway also has a lot of oil. And here we are, the United States. So we're only number 7 in terms of per capita GDP, but that's still not too shabby. If you look at some of these other countries, if you want to go down through the list, yeah, you can see it makes you wonder how people survive in some. Look at these countries down here, $2,500 a year. That is their real per capita GDP. How do they survive? I don't know. It's pretty frightening to look at some of these numbers. But anyway, so you can see it is important to make a distinction, but in general, the growth of either real GDP or per capita could be interpreted as a sign. Oh, email is fine. Yes, you can send in the email by the midterm by email. That's fine. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how this worked out. But anyway, so what else might we want to look at? What other kind of data? So how do we actually calculate, by the way, the percentage of the real GDP growth rate is basically just a simple percentage change. Okay, so in other words, if you want to know how much GDP has gone up in 1 year, what you have to do is take this year's real GDP minus last year's and divide by last year's, and finally multiply by 100 to turn it into a percentage.
Wouldn't that be more meaningful if you took the per capita last year and divided it by the per
Well,
capita?
we're going to do that too, don't worry. Yes. So first we'll do it just as the absolute level of real GDP.
Do you
And
have to
so,
convert that both to real?
yes, I'm assuming that they're already real. Yes, they would have had to be corrected to make them real. Otherwise, I'm mixing apples and oranges here. So let's assume that those are both real numbers already. And so you can see if real GDP went from 10 trillion to 10.8 trillion, the growth rate would have been 8%. Okay, which is very high. I mean, you're not going to see that very often. But so that's a completely made up example, by the way. But like you said, what about per capita? What if we find out that based on these numbers for this country, we now find out that in addition to this real GDP, that in the 2016, the population of this country was 300 million, and the next year it was 305 million. So here's what we can do. That real per capita GDP in 2016 would have been about 33,333.33. Okay. The next year, GDP went up to 10.8 trillion, while the population went up to 305 million. So the total real GDP per capita actually went up to 35,409.84. So now, once again, I simply apply a percentage change, and you can see that the real per capita GDP only went up by 6.23%, as opposed to 8% in the total real GDP, which again indicates that the population grew a little more quickly than the economy did. All right, that's why this is happening. Anyway, so either way you look at it, you can easily calculate. Now, in both of these cases, this is welcome news because it means the economy is growing and our standards of living are growing. Okay, so whenever real GDP goes up, it means there's more real output in the economy. And when per capita goes up, that means there's more real output for each individual as well. Okay. Also, you can tell, by the way, when we're in a recession, how can you tell officially, if you've heard this term in the media before, how is a recession defined? To be super technical about it, a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative real GDP growth. So if we have back-to-back quarters with negative real GDP growth, we're officially in a recession. Okay. So you can see how important this is, this idea of real growth. This is how the government formally defines when we are in a recession. Okay, now, let's see. I think, let me just check something here. I think, like I mentioned before, I have videos that can add something to this discussion. Okay, I'll tell you what, why don't we look at these 2 videos in particular. One of them is called Productivity and Growth, and the other is called The Puzzle of Growth. I think now that we've started talking about this topic, these videos should make a lot of sense and help us see how growth and productivity are tied together, and also help us understand why growth can be so different from one period in time to the next. What is it that's driving growth? What is it that's driving productivity? Okay, so what's responsible for these numbers that we're seeing? So why don't I send this first one off to you and we'll take a look at it. Okay, so let's get that out there and we'll see. Let's check this out.
I don't see the link.
Oops, did I make a mistake when I've done this before. Yep, I see what happened. I know what the problem, and thank you for telling me. I sent it to the wrong, it has to say everyone, and I forgot to fix that. Hold on one second. There we go. It should be okay. You can see it now, right? Okay, great. All right, let's look at it. All right, are we done? All right, so we've got another one coming up. Here we go. This is about, it's called the puzzle of growth this time. All right, let's check this out. All right, is everyone done?
Yeah.
All right. So I was looking at, I like this series. These guys do a very good job with these. There's a video here that it didn't have on my list, but maybe we'll look at it anyway because it's directly related to growth, although it's a specific model of growth that we may not be covering. But let's check this out anyway, because I'm sure it'll be interesting. So hold on one second. Let me just send it off. The worst that can happen is we waste 5 minutes, but I think this one will be worth watching too. So hold on one second. All right, let's see how we like this one. So what do you think? Are we interested in watching the next one about physical capital? Okay, good. All right, let me send it to you. Why not? It's like a story that we have to see what comes up next. All right, let's send this out. Hold on one second. All right, let's watch it. Oh, no. Well, you know what? I guess since we've come this far, we might as well watch the next one, don't you think? All right, let's do it. All right, let's watch this. All right, so I guess everyone's done. All right, so there's one more, but why don't we save that one for next time? Today's what, Thursday? Yeah. So well, what we'll do is we'll save there might be one or two more after this. So we'll save these for Monday, and then we'll get back into our chapter, which is our discussion about economic growth. Now, when growth is done, I think we're going to be ready to move into a completely new area where we're looking at the Federal Reserve and monetary policy, which is a very exciting area. But here we're going to look at growth because, of course, this is what drives our standards of living. So for now, why don't we knock it off right here? And all you have to do between now and Monday, I guess, is make sure you understand what we've been doing and make sure everything, well, I guess, look at the notes. And if you want to rewatch the videos. So, all right. So I guess I'll just see you all next. You should have it ready by tomorrow night. Okay. If your midterm isn't done yet, try to have it in by tomorrow night. Just like I just said before, take a picture of the pages with your camera, make sure the quality is as high as possible. You can email it back. There's also this other app you can get on your iPhone called, hold on one second. Somebody told me about this the other day. It's called Genius Scan. Let me put that in the chat box in case you are a very high-tech person and you understand how all these apps work. And I've been told that it does a nice job of the quality is very high, is what I've been told. So in other words, instead of taking pictures, it might be possible to use this free app on the iPhone called Genius Scan, which from what I've been told, apparently the quality is a little bit better. Oh, absolutely. No, it doesn't matter. Typing is fine. Written is fine. It doesn't matter about that. But it's the copying that sometimes can be a problem. So if you do use your cell phone and take pictures, just try to be careful to make sure I can read what you've done. Sometimes glare can be a problem with documents. And also sometimes they can be too small and it makes it very hard to read it. If you do want to check this out, and I'd honestly like to know what you think about it, if you are willing to give it a try, download Genius Scan, and I would like to see if the quality really is better than simply taking pictures with your camera. But whether the answers are written by hand, whether they've been typed, it doesn't matter as long as they're legible and as long as your picture is of sufficient quality that I can actually read them. All right, that's what we worry about. I've had cases in the past where, let's just say, the work was completely illegible. Midnight till Friday. Yes, that's right. Anything else?
Wait, so we're handwriting this?
No, it doesn't matter. Either way, handwriting or typing is fine.
Okay, thank you.
As long as I can read it. That's all that matters. All right,
Thank you.
anybody else?
Thank you very much.
All right,
Have a
you're
great
welcome.
weekend.
All right, see you next time.
Thank you. Have a great
Thank
weekend.
you.
Thank you. Bye.